10-year-old boy plays key role in unraveling the most terrifying mass shooting in history. The school bell rang, sharp and urgent. The sound pierced the thick air. A warning. Students scrambled through the halls. But something was off. Liam, just 10 years old, stood frozen in his classroom. His heart raced, but his legs wouldn't move. The usual chatter, the noise of feet shuffling, suddenly stopped. A low hum filled the space. Then the distant echo of something else, gunshots. Liam's breath caught in his throat. The windows rattled. His teacher, Mrs. Harper, rushed to the door and peeked through the small glass window. She froze. Liam could see her eyes widen, her face pale. "Get under the desk," she screamed. Her voice cracked. But Liam didn't move. Something inside him kept him still. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, came closer. Heavy. Liam's hands trembled. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The door creaked open. A shadow loomed in the doorway. A man, dressed in black, with a gun in his hand. The air grew thick. The room was suffocating. Liam stared at the man, trying to keep his breath steady. His mind raced. Should he hide? Should he run? But then he remembered something. His father had taught him to think quickly. Stay calm, his father had always said. Think. Be brave. Liam had learned to observe, to listen. The man stepped into the room, gun raised. But Liam's eyes never left the figure. He noticed the way his hand trembled, the way the gun wavered. Liam's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He saw the man's foot shuffle, just slightly. The floorboard creaked under the weight. Liam knew it. The man wasn't as steady as he seemed. He was scared, just like Liam. But Liam didn't panic. He moved slowly, carefully behind the desk. His fingers brushed against something, his backpack. Inside, his father's old phone was tucked away. Liam pulled it out as quietly as he could. He tapped the screen, trying not to make a sound. The phone lit up. His father's voice echoed in his head. Call 911 if you can. Stay hidden. Stay safe. Liam dialed quickly, his hands shaking. But he didn't hesitate. The phone rang. It felt like hours. Finally, a voice answered. 911. What's your emergency? Liam's voice was steady, sharp. There's a shooter. He's in my classroom. The operator's voice was calm, but urgent. Where are you? Are you safe? Liam swallowed. Yes, but I need help. He's here. There was a pause. The operator spoke again, softer now. Stay quiet. We're sending help. Stay hidden. Liam nodded, though no one could see. He tucked the phone into his pocket. The room was deathly silent. Every breath felt louder than the last. He could hear the man's voice, muffled now. He was talking to someone. Liam couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Threatening. The tension in the room grew heavier. Liam kept still. He could feel the weight of the gun in the air, pressing down on him. Then suddenly there was a noise. Loud. Footsteps. Fast. A crash, followed by shouting. Liam's heart leapt. He pressed himself into the corner, holding his breath. The door to the classroom slammed open. The figure in black turned. Liam peeked out just in time to see the man's expression shift. Fear. His eyes locked with Liam's for a split second. A deep silence followed. Then the door crashed again. This time, it was the police. They stormed in, weapons drawn. The man froze. For one tense moment, Liam felt a strange calm wash over him. His hands were no longer trembling. The officer shouted. The man dropped his gun. He fell to his knees. The tension finally snapped. Liam exhaled, his breath shaky. The officers rushed to the man. But Liam didn't look away. He stared at the fallen figure. A deep, sickening chill filled the room. But somehow he felt lighter. He had done it. The officers handcuffed the man quickly. Their movements sharp, practiced. Liam stayed silent. He watched every detail, his mind processing the chaos. Outside, sirens wailed, growing louder. But here, in the classroom, there was an eerie quiet. The weight of the moment pressed in on him. His body finally seemed to realize what had just happened. He took a deep, shaky breath. Then another. He wanted to move, but his legs wouldn't work. Liam felt his pulse race in his throat, thudding hard. The officers looked at him now. One of them knelt down. "Are you okay, kid?" Liam didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands. They were still trembling. But something inside him clicked. His voice came out, quieter than he expected. I called you," he said. The officer's eyes widened. "You called 911?" he asked, his voice softer now. Liam nodded, just a little. The officer looked back at his partner. Then he looked back at Liam, his face serious. "You saved lives today," he said quietly. Liam didn't know how to respond to that. He just stared at the fallen man, the man who had caused so much fear. But now, everything felt different. The room was full of voices now, police, medics, teachers. But Liam only heard the sound of his own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. It was a strange feeling, almost like he was watching it all from somewhere far away. He blinked, feeling a rush of tears. But he didn't let them fall. Not yet. Not now. The officers led the man out, cuffed and silent. Liam could hear the murmurs of other kids in the hallway. They were talking, crying, hugging. But Liam stayed still. His mind was a blur of images. The sound of the gunshots. The sight of the man's face. His shaking hands. But then, his father's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay calm. Think. Be brave." Liam's father had taught him that. And today, Liam had been brave. It didn't feel real. Not yet. But he knew, deep down, that he had done something important. Something that would make a difference. The world outside would change, but Liam had stayed strong. He had done what no one expected. And in doing so, he had stopped something far worse from happening. For now, he was safe. For now, they all were. The world outside seemed to shift, suddenly quieter, as if it too was catching its breath. Liam's mind was still racing, but his body felt oddly numb. He was sitting now in the corner of the classroom, his legs crossed beneath him. He could hear the faint murmur of voices in the hallway, police talking to teachers, medics reassuring children. But nothing felt real. The echo of the gunshots was still there in the back of his mind. Each one a flash, a memory he couldn't fully place. Liam's teacher, Mrs. Harper, knelt beside him, her eyes soft with concern. She asked him something, but he didn't catch it. He was lost in his own thoughts, too loud, too scattered. Then he felt it, a hand on his shoulder. His father's voice, clear and steady, cut through the storm in his mind. "Liam, Liam, are you okay?" Liam's head snapped up. He blinked. There, standing in the doorway, was his father. It was almost too much to process. His father's eyes were wide, his expression torn between relief and worry. Liam's heart skipped. For a moment, everything else faded away. Just the two of them. Father and son. Liam opened his mouth, but words didn't come. His throat felt tight. His father stepped forward, crouching down beside him. He didn't speak right away. Just placed a hand gently on Liam's cheek. "You are so brave, son," his father whispered, his voice shaking now. Liam swallowed hard. He felt the weight of the moment, his bravery, his fear, everything. But the one thing that held him together was his father's presence. Liam finally spoke, his voice small, uncertain. Is it over?" His father nodded slowly, his eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. "Yes. It's over now." But Liam wasn't sure it really was. He glanced around the room again, the faces of officers and students, their expressions all different. Some relieved, some still in shock. It was a world that had been turned upside down. Liam's father stood up, extending his hand. Liam hesitated for only a second before he took it. The grip was strong, comforting, and when his father pulled him close, Liam finally let the tears come. They rolled down his cheeks, slow and steady. It wasn't fear anymore. It was relief. And maybe something else. In that moment, Liam realized that he had done something no one would have expected. He had stood up in the face of terror when all he wanted was to run. He had saved lives. And now, As the noise in the hallway died down and the sounds of sirens grew faint, Liam knew his life, and the world around him, had changed forever. But the most important thing was that he had made it through. And so had they. As the tears slowly faded, Liam pulled back from his father's embrace, wiping his face with the sleeve of his shirt. He felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The kind of weariness that only comes after something too big for a 10-year-old to fully understand. But it was done. He had done it. The police officers were now speaking in hushed tones, giving statements, taking notes. The world outside the classroom had returned to a frantic rhythm, but Liam felt as though he was suspended in time. Like the storm had passed, but the air was still heavy with its remnants. His father crouched next to him again, his eyes never leaving Liam's face. "You're not alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Liam nodded, grateful for the reassurance. But then something shifted in him. A question, small but urgent, pushed to the surface. "What about the others?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His father hesitated. Liam saw the way his dad's jaw tightened. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, but also something else, pride. He put a hand on Liam's shoulder, the weight of it grounding him. "We'll make sure everyone is okay, Liam," his father said softly. "They're going to get the help they need. You did everything right." Liam felt the truth of those words, even as his chest tightened with a new fear. He thought of the other students, the ones who might be hurt, the ones who had seen the same terrifying thing he had. Would they be okay? He wondered how many of them would be able to go back to school as if nothing had happened. How many would carry the same memory, like a shadow that followed them no matter where they went. His mind wandered again to the moments before the police arrived. The man, frozen in place, looking directly at him. Liam's breath caught at the memory. The cold, calculating look in the man's eyes, mixed with the unmistakable flicker of hesitation. Liam had seen that hesitation, that split second where the gun wasn't aimed, where the world hung in balance. What would have happened if he hadn't made the call? Would they all be here now? The question haunted him. His father seemed to sense his thoughts. He didn't speak, but placed his hand back on Liam's shoulder, firm and steady. "You did what you had to do," he said again. And though Liam didn't have the answer to his own question, those words, those simple, unwavering words, brought him a measure of peace. They didn't have all the answers. Not yet. But they had each other. And that was enough. Outside, the sirens began to fade into the distance, replaced by the murmur of voices. People were beginning to move forward. But Liam knew something that day that few others his age would ever understand. Bravery wasn't about not being scared. It was about doing what was right, even when fear gripped you tight. And for the first time, he could feel his fear slipping away, replaced by something new, something stronger. It wasn't over. Not yet. But Liam knew, in his heart, that he had just taken the first step toward healing. For him. For everyone. And for a world that had been forced to remember what it meant to be brave. The hours that followed felt like a blur. Liam's mind still struggled to catch up with the events of the day. His father stayed close, never leaving his side. They were escorted out of the classroom by officers, but Liam wasn't really aware of where he was going. His legs moved on their own, his mind still trapped in the moment the man had stepped through that door. The hallway was now crowded with kids, their faces pale, their eyes wide. Some were crying, some were holding on to each other for comfort. But there was something else, too. A strange, collective silence. Liam couldn't explain it, but it felt like the air was thick, like everyone was holding their breath. As he passed, a few kids turned to look at him, their gazes full of something unspoken. Liam couldn't quite place it. Gratitude? Fear? A mix of both? He avoided their eyes, focusing instead on his father's hand in his. The doors to the outside world opened, and the cool air hit Liam's face like a wave. For the first time that day, he felt something that wasn't fear or confusion. He felt free. The chaos outside was overwhelming. Ambulances, police cars, news vans, but it all seemed distant. He heard the rush of footsteps behind him, people shouting, the clicking of cameras, the hum of voices. but his world was just the space between him and his father. They walked toward a waiting car, where other officers were gathered, making sure everyone was accounted for. Liam's father guided him gently into the back seat, giving him a brief, reassuring glance. "We'll get through this," he said softly. Liam nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the window, watching the world pass by. It was the strangest thing. The city, the people, everything looked normal. But Liam felt like he had crossed into some other reality. One where nothing was the same, where moments could change lives. They drove in silence for a while, until Liam finally broke it. "I keep thinking about him," he said quietly. His father glanced at him, his expression unreadable for a second. Then he said, "You mean the shooters?" Liam nodded. Why didn't he hurt anyone else? Why did he stop? His father's grip on the wheel tightened. "He was stopped because you acted. You were brave. You called for help when it mattered most." "But how did I know?" Liam's voice cracked. "How did I know he wouldn't hurt anyone else if I didn't do anything?" There was a long pause before his father spoke, his voice calm, but with a weight that came from experience. "Sometimes, we don't know. Sometimes, we have to trust that the right thing will happen if we do our part." Liam let his father's words sink in, his mind trying to make sense of them. It didn't feel real, any of it. He wanted to scream, to ask why it had to happen, why anyone would do such a thing in the first place. But he knew those questions didn't have answers. Not yet, anyway. Instead, he leaned back against the seat, eyes half closed, and let himself breathe. For the first time that day, he could feel the weight lifting. It was still there, lingering, but not as heavy. As they drove, Liam began to notice something else. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the streets. The sky, once bright with the midday sun, was now tinged with pinks and oranges. It was a new day in a way. A day that would be remembered, but also a day that would eventually pass. Liam didn't know how the future would look, or when things would go back to normal. But for now, he was safe. And maybe that was enough. Just for tonight. When they reached home, the house felt like a haven. The chaos, the noise, the fear. All of it seemed so distant now. Liam's father turned to him once more, his voice softer than ever. "We're going to be okay. We'll heal, Liam. Together." Liam nodded, still unsure of how he felt, but he could sense the truth in his father's words. There would be healing. It wouldn't be fast, but there would be hope. And that was enough for him to hold on to. For now. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and the house seemed to swallow the world outside. The sounds of the city, the sirens, the shouts, the hum of a world still in motion, faded into the background. Liam stood still for a moment, his hand resting on the doorknob, his mind processing everything that had happened. It felt surreal, like stepping out of one world and into another. A world where he was safe. But nothing felt the same. The air in the house was thick with the weight of the day. It clung to him, heavy and lingering. His father walked toward the kitchen, the quiet creak of his shoes against the hardwood floor echoing in the silence. Liam stayed where he was, eyes locked on the hallway ahead. It was just a hallway. Just a normal hallway. But now, every step felt like it carried the burden of the day. He thought of his friends, of the classmates still shaken and unsure. How would they go back to class? How would they ever forget what they'd seen? Liam's stomach twisted at the thought. His father returned with 2 glasses of water, handing one to Liam. "Drink this," he said gently. Liam took the glass, but his hands were still unsteady. Do you think it'll ever feel normal again?" Liam asked, his voice quieter than usual. His father looked at him, searching his face. "I don't know, Liam. Maybe not for a while," he said. "But that doesn't mean we can't find a way to move forward. One step at a time." Liam nodded, but something inside him wasn't ready to move forward yet. His heart still pounded in his chest, as if it hadn't yet realized that the danger was over. As he stared at the water in his hand, his thoughts drifted back to the moment in the classroom when the man's eyes met his. He had felt fear then, yes. But he had also felt something else. Something almost familiar. It was in the way the man hesitated. in the way his grip on the gun faltered for just a fraction of a second. For just that brief moment, Liam had seen the same kind of fear in the man's eyes that he had felt in his own heart. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. His father sat beside him, offering a quiet presence as Liam tried to push the thoughts from his mind. "Hey, son," his father said after a long pause. "We don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. But I'm here. Whenever you need me." Liam took a slow, shaky breath, trying to steady himself. He didn't know what to say, what to feel. Why did he do it? Liam asked, his voice small. Why did he come into the school? His father exhaled, looking down at the glass in his hands, as if searching for an answer. "I don't know, Liam," he said softly. "Some people make choices that don't make sense. But you can't control other people's choices. All you can control is how you respond." Liam nodded, but the question still lingered in the back of his mind. Why did it happen? Why was that man there? But deep down, he knew that there would never be a clear answer to that question. Not now, and maybe not ever. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Liam's father stood up, excusing himself, and walked into the other room to answer. Liam stayed in the kitchen, his thoughts swirling around him. The house, which had always felt like a safe place, now seemed too quiet, too still. He wanted to do something, to feel something other than this weight pressing down on his chest. But everything felt muted, like the colors had faded, like the world outside was out of reach. He got up slowly, walking toward the window that overlooked the front yard. The sky was dark now, the stars beginning to flicker in the distance. It was peaceful out there. But not in here, not in his mind. He pressed his hand against the cool glass, staring out into the night. What would tomorrow bring? Would he ever forget the sound of the gunshots? Would his mind ever be at peace again? His father returned, his face a little more serious than before. "That was the police," his father said, walking over to Liam. "They want to talk to us tomorrow. Just to follow up." Liam nodded absently. His father paused for a moment, then placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, his grip warm and steady. "I know you're processing all of this, son," he said, his voice calm. "But no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter how hard it gets, remember this. You did what no one expected you to do. You acted when others froze. You were the one who saved lives today." Liam's throat tightened at his father's words, but he didn't respond right away. His father leaned down slightly, meeting his eyes. "We're going to get through this. You're going to get through this. And you'll be stronger for it." Liam didn't know if he believed that yet, but he held on to it. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But someday. The night stretched on, silent and heavy, as Liam and his father sat together, just being there. In that moment, it was enough. The silence in the room settled like a thick fog, wrapping around them both. Liam's mind still buzzed with fragments of the day, images and sounds that felt out of place, out of time. The crack of gunshots, the distant scream of a siren, the sound of his own heartbeat hammering in his chest. But as the hours passed, he could feel the tension in his body slowly unwinding. The weight, though still there, wasn't as crushing, not as loud. His father sat beside him, not rushing, not pressing him to talk. Just being there. It was a quiet kind of comfort, the kind only a parent could offer in moments like these. Liam's eyes drifted toward the window again, where the dark skies stretched wide and endless. The stars blinked like tiny, distant lights in the vast night. For a second, he wondered if the stars had always been this bright. Or maybe it was just that tonight they felt different, like they held something the day couldn't. The quiet tick of the clock on the wall was the only sound, a reminder that the world still moved forward, even if Liam wasn't ready for it. His father broke the silence softly, his voice low but steady. "Tomorrow will be tough, Liam. Talking to the police, answering questions. It might feel like everything's rushing at you all over again." Liam didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure how to. He didn't want to think about tomorrow. He didn't want to think about the interviews, the reports, the process of reliving the day over and over again. But he knew it was inevitable. "It's okay to feel confused," his father continued. to feel like things don't make sense. But just remember that you're allowed to feel however you feel. Liam nodded, even though the words didn't sink in right away. His father stood up and walked over to the door, turning back for just a moment. "I'll be in the living room if you need me," he said softly. "Get some rest, Liam. You've done enough for today." Liam barely heard him. His eyes were glued to the window again, watching the shadows stretch and shift outside. When his father left, the house seemed to close in around him. The quiet, once comforting, now felt heavy. He stared at his reflection in the glass, his tired eyes looking back at him. Could anyone ever be the same after something like this? The question gnawed at him, but he didn't have an answer. He let out a long, shaky breath, running his fingers through his hair. The weight in his chest hadn't disappeared, but now it was just there, a constant reminder that today something unimaginable had happened. And he had been right in the middle of it. Liam walked slowly to the couch and sank into the cushions, the weight of exhaustion pulling at his limbs. He was so tired. Physically, mentally, emotionally. Everything felt like it was spinning just a little too fast. His thoughts drifted back to the classroom, to the man with the gun, to that frozen moment when time had seemed to stop. Was it really him who had made the difference? Or had the world just shifted by some twist of fate? Liam didn't know, but the quiet voice in his head whispered that he had acted when it counted, that at the core of it he had done something. Something no one expected. Something brave. The thought was small, almost fragile, but it clung to him. And in that fragile moment, he let it settle. For the first time that night, Liam closed his eyes, not completely calm, but somewhat at peace. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually, the exhaustion took over. His body relaxed, and his thoughts drifted in and out of focus. Tomorrow would come, whether he was ready or not. But tonight, he was safe. Tonight, they were all safe. That was enough for now. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow he would wake up and find a way to carry on. One small step at a time. Because, as his father had said, there was always a way forward. And for Liam, that was all he needed to hold on to. The soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains, gently pulling Liam from his sleep. His eyelids fluttered open, the world still hazy around him. For a moment, he wasn't sure where he was, the events of yesterday lingering in his mind like a heavy fog. But then the memories rushed back. The classroom, the man, the shots, the fear. Liam lay there for a few moments, not quite ready to move. The weight of it all was still there, pressing on his chest. But it felt quieter now, less overwhelming. He took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs. Everything outside was still. The house was silent. His father was already up, probably in the kitchen, making breakfast, just like any other normal morning. But nothing felt normal. Liam swung his legs off the side of the bed, his feet touching the cold hardwood floor. The room was dim, the shadows long and stretched across the floor. He stood up slowly, his body still heavy with the aftermath of everything. A part of him wanted to stay hidden, to curl back into the blankets and pretend like none of it had happened. But he knew he couldn't do that. Today was another day. Today, he would have to face the questions. The interviews. The inevitable reminders of the horror. Liam walked toward the door, pausing for a moment to look out the window. The sky was still a soft, pale blue, the sun barely rising over the horizon.
It looked like a normal day.
But it wasn't. Nothing would ever be normal again. Not for a long time. He took another deep breath, steadying himself. And then, with one last glance at the quiet room behind him, he stepped into the hallway. The house smelled like pancakes and coffee, the warmth of his father's presence filling the air. Liam made his way downstairs, the familiar sound of his father humming lightly as he worked in the kitchen. When his father turned to look at him, there was a smile on his face, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Liam could see the tiredness there, the exhaustion that hadn't been there before. But his father didn't say anything about it. Instead, he just gestured toward the table.
"Morning, champ."
"I made your favorite," he said, his voice soft. Liam nodded, walking over to the table. He sat down slowly, his mind still racing. The world outside was waking up, but inside, everything still felt like it was frozen in time. His father placed a plate in front of him, and for a moment, Liam didn't know what to say. But then his father spoke again, his voice steady, but filled with that same quiet strength. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Liam looked down at his pancakes, not really seeing them. His fingers toyed with the edge of the plate, his thoughts drifting back to the night before, to the silence that had fallen over their home. "I don't know," Liam said after a long pause, his voice barely above a whisper. "I feel weird. Like, nothing's really changed, but everything's different." His father nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what Liam meant. "I get it," he said quietly. "It's hard, but we'll take it one step at a time, okay? Today, we'll get through it together." Liam looked up at his father, searching his face. The tiredness was still there, but there was something else too, something deeper. A quiet, unspoken bond that they shared. Liam's father put a hand on his shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice reassuring. Liam didn't know if he believed it yet, but somehow hearing his father say those words made him feel like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. He took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. The day would come, just like every other day. But today felt different. Today, he would face what had happened. Today, he would speak to the police, answer their questions, and try to piece together the broken parts of his memory. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't be doing it alone. His father was with him. And for now, that was enough. Liam took a bite of his pancakes, the taste a little sweeter than usual, though his stomach was still tight with nerves. The world outside was moving on, slowly but surely. And so would he. One step at a time. The day stretched ahead, uncertain and heavy, but Liam felt a small flicker of something inside him. Something that hadn't been there before. Bravery. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to face whatever the future held. Liam chewed slowly, the taste of the pancakes grounding him in the moment. The warmth of the food felt like a reminder that some things at least could stay the same. His father's presence, the quiet hum of the kitchen, even the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, it was all a comfort. For a while, neither of them said anything. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was just there. The kind of silence that comes when two people don't need words to understand what the other is feeling. But as the last of his pancakes disappeared, Liam felt the familiar knot in his stomach return. The nerves, the weight of the day, were beginning to settle in. His hands gripped the edge of his plate, his fingers tracing the rim without thinking. His father must have sensed a shift because he reached across the table and placed a hand over Liam's. "Hey," he said gently, his voice soft but firm. "We don't have to rush. You can take your time today. No one's expecting you to have all the answers right away." Liam nodded, but the words didn't completely settle. It was hard to ignore the mounting pressure that he had to somehow make sense of everything that had happened, that he needed to somehow explain the unexplainable. "What if I can't remember everything?" Liam asked, his voice small. He looked up, searching his father's face. "What if I forget something important?" His father's expression softened, and he gave Liam's hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, Liam. You don't need to remember every little detail. Just tell them what you do remember. And if something comes back later, that's okay too. What's important is that you're here, that you're safe, and that you're telling your truth." Liam took in a deep breath, his father's words settling into his chest. It wasn't going to be perfect. Nothing would be perfect after a day like yesterday. But it didn't have to be. He didn't have to be perfect either. "I'll try," Liam said quietly, his voice steadying a little as he met his father's gaze. "That's all anyone can ask of you," his father replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It wasn't a full smile, but it was enough to make Liam feel just a little lighter. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke their moment. Liam glanced toward the window, his heart rate picking up just a little. His mind raced, wondering if it was the police, ready to come to ask him those questions. His father noticed the shift in his expression and stood up, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Ready?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Liam nodded, his stomach tightening again, but there was a quiet strength in him now. He wasn't sure where it came from, but he wasn't about to question it. They stood up together, walking toward the door. As they stepped outside, the world felt different. The streets, the trees, the way the sun reflected off the leaves, they were all the same as they had been the day before. But somehow Liam noticed them more. He noticed the details. It was as if the world had taken on a sharper focus, like he was seeing everything for the first time. The police car was parked at the curb, a few officers standing outside. They were talking quietly, but as Liam and his father approached, the conversation stopped. Everyone's attention shifted toward them. Liam's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't look away. His father's hand was on his back again, guiding him forward. There was a quiet confidence in his touch, something that made Liam feel like he wasn't facing the world alone. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. She smiled gently at Liam, crouching down to his level. "Hey there, Liam," she said softly, her voice warm. "I'm Officer Bennett. I just want to thank you again for everything you did yesterday. You were very brave." Liam didn't know how to respond to that. His mind still struggled to process it all. Brave?
Him?
But there was something in the officer's voice, something sincere that made Liam feel like maybe, just maybe, he had done something important. He'd been a part of something bigger than himself. "You okay?" Officer Bennett asked, her eyes full of understanding. Liam hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah," he said, his voice small but clear. "I'm okay, I think." Officer Bennett gave him a gentle smile and then straightened up, motioning for Liam to follow her toward the car. His father stayed close, his presence solid and reassuring. As they approached the car, another officer stepped forward with a notebook, ready to start the questioning. Liam's chest tightened again, but this time, it felt different. He wasn't scared of the questions, not in the way he had been the night before.
This was just the next step.
This was part of moving forward, one question at a time. And with each answer, he knew he'd be that much closer to healing. He wasn't sure how long it would take, or what it would look like in the end. But today, he was here. He was still standing, still breathing. And maybe, for the first time in a while, that was enough. The day stretched on, quieter now, but no less heavy. After the questions from the officers, the steady stream of well-wishers, the endless rounds of phone calls, it felt as if the world was still holding its breath. Everything was moving forward, but Liam couldn't shake the feeling that it was all happening too fast. The hours blurred together, one after another, a never-ending tide of motions and responsibilities. When they finally returned home that afternoon, the house felt different. The air felt thinner, lighter somehow, but still thick with the remnants of yesterday's terror. Liam set his bag down by the door and just stood there for a moment, staring into the quiet. The weight of it all pressed on him, as it had since the first shot rang out, but there was something else now. Something he couldn't quite place. His father, still a little worn from the day's events, moved through the kitchen, quietly preparing dinner. Liam didn't need to say anything. His presence, his company was enough. That had been one of the things his father had said earlier. You don't have to have all the answers today. You don't even have to know what comes next. We'll take it one moment at a time. And Liam was starting to believe it. He wandered into the living room, his eyes scanning the room as though trying to find something to hold on to. The space was familiar, comfortable even, but somehow, it had become alien overnight. The couch where he'd watched cartoons just last week now felt like an island in the middle of a storm. His thoughts shifted back to the classroom again.
To the man.
To that terrible moment when his whole world had tilted on its axis. There was a tightness in his chest as he remembered the way the man had frozen in front of him. The way he had hesitated. Why had he stopped? Why hadn't the man followed through? Liam didn't know the answer, but now he felt it. The man's actions, his hesitation, had created a crack in the wall of chaos. In that moment, Liam had acted, and so had the world around him. In some small way, it had all come together, and that was something he could hold on to. As the evening drew closer, and the sounds of his father moving through the house filled the space, Liam finally felt the smallest flicker of peace. Not the kind that erased the past, not the kind that promised no more pain, but the kind that whispered, "Asterisk, you'll keep going." One step at a time, asterisk. And that was enough for now. Liam sat down at the kitchen table, where his father was setting out their plates. There was no fanfare, no applause, no grand moment. Just a quiet meal, shared in the comfort of home. But for the first time in days, Liam could feel the world shifting around him. The fear, the confusion, the uncertainty. They weren't gone, but they were no longer all-consuming. The day would come when things would be different, when the memory of yesterday's horror would fade into something more manageable, something less sharp. And in the meantime, he would hold onto the small victories, the ones that came not from the grand gestures, but from the quiet, brave moments when you decide to keep moving, even when you don't know what comes next. One moment, one step, one day at a time. The days that followed felt like a quiet river, flowing forward, carrying Liam along in its current. Each moment felt heavy with the weight of what had happened, but it was also somehow softer, less sharp. The terror of that day hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, and Liam was starting to understand that healing wasn't a straight path. It wasn't something that could be fixed with a single moment or word. It was a long, winding road, one that would take time to travel. Liam's father had been there every step of the way, his presence constant and steady. At night, they would sit together in the living room, watching the news, listening to the reports. They never spoke about the shooting unless Liam was ready to talk, but the unspoken understanding was always there. They didn't have to fill the silence with words. Just being in the same room, sharing the space, was enough. One evening, as the last rays of daylight filtered through the window, Liam sat at the kitchen table, his notebook open in front of him. He wasn't writing anything yet, but his pen rested in his hand, and his thoughts wandered. The question from the police, from everyone who had asked, echoed in his mind. How did you stay so calm? At the time, he hadn't known the answer. He hadn't understood it himself. But now, in the quiet of the kitchen, he thought he might. He wasn't sure if it was bravery or instinct, or maybe just the will to survive, but in that moment, when it mattered most, he had acted. His heart had raced, his stomach had twisted in fear, but his mind had kept him focused. It wasn't a conscious choice. It just happened. He had done what he needed to do, and in that moment, that had been enough. Liam closed the notebook, set down his pen, and leaned back in his chair. The house was peaceful. His father was humming softly in the living room, the sound of his voice threading through the still air. Everything felt ordinary again, normal even. But Liam knew it would never be the same. He didn't need it to be. Tomorrow would come, just like today. And the day after that. And with each new sunrise, Liam would move forward. One step at a time. With his father by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. For now, that was enough. And that was the most important thing.